There is a nice analogy of a honeybee and a fly. On one side, we have the honeybee, and on the other, a fly. Both of these small creatures, they fly here and there, but each one has a very different approach. Let's take the honeybee, for example. The honeybee flies from one flower to another, extracting only the nectar without disturbing the flower itself. The mindset of a honeybee is to seek the essence of each and every flower. Even in a place filled with piles and piles of rotting garbage, rather than giving its attention to all the filth, the honeybee focuses on finding only the nectar. So it will eagerly seek out even a single tiny flower amidst lots and lots of garbage. We can use this example of the honeybee to teach us a very important lesson in terms of relationships with other people. The honeybee teaches us, firstly, the art of focusing on the positives, and secondly, dealing appropriately with the faults in each other. Now we know that there will be deficiencies and faults everywhere and in everyone. There is never a shortage of things to complain about. But just as the honeybee seeks only the nectar, even in the most unexpected places, we too can learn to focus on the positive qualities in those around us. Now let's take the fly. The fly also represents a mindset which is actually totally different from the honeybee. It also travels over hundreds and hundreds of flowers. But where does its focus lie? It focuses only on tasting the garbage and the filth. It totally ignores the sweet fragrance of rose gardens. Even in the best of circumstances and in the cleanest places, the fly will only focus on the trash. So this kind of behavior represents a mindset of not only ignoring the good qualities in those around us, but concentrating primarily on their faults. But why does this happen? Well, the first thing is that fault finding is a habit. It is all so very easy and requires no effort to see the flaws and faults in other people. In an unchallenged way, it is getting a subtle lift to our self-esteem by diminishing someone else's value. So finding faults in other people silently infers that we are better than them. And naturally this plays into our ego. A writer by the name of Henry David Thoreau observed that the fault finder will find faults even in paradise. So just like any other habit, fault finding takes a conscious effort to break. The second reason about this negative thinking is that we judge people by their cover, meaning their outer qualities and actions. So we often make the mistake of perceiving others through our own ingrained narrow beliefs and assumptions, such as a person's skin color, status, or talent, or even their appearance and their social profile. So we often jump to conclusions. Our preconceived notion about someone or something influences what we see. So in other words, our attitude shapes our perception of the world within which we live. The third thing is that superiority complex. That is one of the reasons why this negative attitude is always maintained. Because sometimes we look at ourselves as far more superior than other people. If you think about it, the underlying reason for this kind of attitude is nothing but arrogance and ego. So we may end up saying that what I believe in is always right. My opinion is the best, and other people's opinions are useless. We may say that my approach is the right approach, but other people's approach is not worthwhile. This kind of narrative creates a spiral of egocentric mindset, which in turn fuels our ego. As a result, we look at other people as inferior to us. It is a vicious trap. We then tend to belittle other people, and we look upon other people or individuals as people who don't really fit in with us. What can we do to develop a positive attitude? Well, the first thing we can do is to practice what's called emotional hygiene. Dr. Guy Winch, a leading psychologist in New York, said that 100 years ago, people began practicing personal hygiene, and life expectancy rates rose by over 50% in just a matter of decades. So then he goes on to say that I believe that our quality of life could also rise just as dramatically if we all began practicing emotional hygiene. What does this do? Well, it fights the negative thinking within us. He goes on to say that one will not only heal one's psychological wounds, but one will build an emotional resilience and thrive. So people will feel much happier, they'll be much more fulfilled, and the world would be a better place to live. The second thing we can do is to change the way we look at things. There is a very nice illustration to help us explain this. Akbar, the Mughal emperor, once had a dream. Now, in that dream, he found that he only had one tooth left. Naturally, he was puzzled by this, so he consulted his astrologer to interpret the dream. The astrologer came up and he looked at all his charts, and after about 3 hours, he gave his verdict. He said to the king that all your family members would die before you. So the king became disheartened. In fact, he was furious. He immediately expelled the astrologer from the kingdom, and then later he called Birbal, his personal advisor, and he asked him the same question to interpret the dream. So Birbal thought for a while, and then he said, "Your Majesty, the dream reveals that you shall live longer than all your family members." The king was happy to hear this, and he found that his long and healthy life for himself would benefit him. So naturally, he rewarded Birbal. Now, if we think about this, both of these interpretations were exactly the same, but there was one big difference. The difference was that the astrologer negatively classified the dream. He put a negative frame around it that evoked a negative emotion in the king. The king became frustrated, angry, and he threw the astrologer out. Birbal, on the other hand, classified the dream positively. He put a positive frame around it. So we can say that instead of saying that the glass is half empty, he said the glass is half full. So rather than saying that your family members would die before you, he said to the king that, "King, you shall live much, much longer than anybody else." So Birbal's success was his ability to represent things in a positive way just by reframing. The third thing is that we must become a little bit more humble to develop a positive attitude. We all find it very difficult to admit when we are wrong. So in an increasingly polarized world, it seems as if people are more convinced of their own beliefs and willing to contemplate or not willing to contemplate other people's point of views. So the idea of intellectual humility is that we should be more humble in our opinions and in our dealings with other people. A researcher by the name of David Dunning, who is a social psychologist, he says that we must know our limits. He says that in relationships, it is essential to have an honest and sincere communication, focusing on appreciating the positives while graciously and constructively dealing with the negatives, and at the same time trying to bring out the best in each other will help us in the long run. It will recognize our own positive qualities within us, and we will become much more happier. In conclusion, we know that the world is full of both good and bad. There are bound to be virtues in everyone on this planet, and at the same time, there are bound to be drawbacks and faults. But the important thing is, and the good thing is, that we have the power to choose what we focus on. Either we can be like the honeybee or the fly. It is entirely up to us. It is in our own hands.